recording is Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Renee Garrett and I'm your Speech Therapy PD podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few items to alert you to. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for zero point 0.1 ASHA CEU. If you're joining us for the live episode and your state license requires live CEUs, be sure to complete all course modules, including the one that says complete course, before the end of the day on your Speech Therapy PD account. As trauma-informed care providers, it's important to let you know this episode may contain subject matter that is a trigger for some listeners. Incidents of traumatic events, injuries, and mental health issues will be discussed. Please listen with caution if these situations are a trauma or mental health concern for you. And while we want you to be here with us, we want to make you aware that these events may be difficult to listen to. Here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. Jessica Cortez is the owner of the Loom Connection LLC and receives compensation for this presentation from Speech Therapy PD. Her non-financial disclosure is she's a member of ASHA SIG 2 Neurogenic Communication Disorders. My financial disclosures is that I'm the owner and founder of BrainBridge Connect, and as the host of Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, I receive financial compensation from Speech Therapy PD for the podcast and other educational webinars. I'm also an adjunct instructor at both James Madison University and Old Dominion University. My non-financial disclosure is that I'm the secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Questions can be written in the chat box or the Q&A and will be answered throughout the presentation. Now, without further ado, we welcome our guest, Jessica Cortez MA, CCC-SLP, CBIS, who is a speech-language pathologist and certified brain injury specialist with over 15 years of experience working with adults and adolescents in various medical settings. She earned her master's in speech-language pathology from the George Washington University and her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Mount Union. She now lives in northern Colorado and owns the Loom Connection, where she focuses exclusively on treating acquired brain injuries in the general population and criminal justice system. Jessica, so good to see you and welcome. Thank you for agreeing to do the podcast and for being here with me.
Thank you
Well,
so
and with
much for
us.
having me. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, so I always like to start with a little, I guess, anecdotal story about how I'm connected to some of the guests. And so thank you, first of all, for coming to my presentation at ASHA at 5 p.m. on a Friday night.
Yeah,
Because thought
I
I'd
was
have
all
like
there.
five people who I probably, maybe bought dinner. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for coming to that. And, I think I came out of that discussion with like 5 or 8 new connections, which was phenomenal. And I'm so grateful that you're one of those people who came and asked questions and participated. So thank you for that because it really helped, make me feel like, okay, I'm here for a reason. The work I'm doing is valid and as a human, and we need that personal connection. And as SLPs, I think we really gain a lot from that personal connection as well.
Of course, yes, for sure. Yeah.
So just a little background, how did you get, like, tell us about what you did before you started your private practice, because I'm sure there was more to what you did prior to what you're doing now.
Yes, well, I've always been really, really excited about traumatic brain injury. I had a little bit of undergraduate research experience and graduate research experience in TBI. And then when I got out, I kind of dabbled like in a lot of different areas, like many SLPs. I worked in rehab hospitals, long-term care, subacute, a lot of time in home health. And I also worked in the schools too. I worked in a juvenile detention center. I worked in mental health hospital for adolescents. So I kind of dabbled in a lot of different areas, but TBI and acquired brain injury has always been my number one love. And it got to the point where I was just so interested in it that I thought, well, I'm just going to just go with that and make that my concentration. And that's why I started the Loom Connection about 3 years ago, and have just been totally focusing my continuing education and my practice on acquired brain injuries, especially in the criminal justice system and the general public too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we kind of connected on immediately was that I say weird things like I love a good brain injury and
I know.
sounds terrible, but I think people that really enjoy working with this population get it because not everyone does, right?
Yes, and I was like that too. Every time I was in the hospital and every time I was at home health, if it was a TBI, I was like, "Oh, okay, let's go." But yeah, it's just a wonderful population to treat and so rewarding. And it just brings me life. I don't even feel like I'm working.
Yeah, no, I feel that. And again, I'm just grateful for the connection and for your willingness to be on the podcast because I know this is kind of not something, that is an everyday thing for you. So I appreciate
Yeah,
you being here and willing to share your expertise.
yeah. Well, I think it's a
So,
really good place to be, and as an SLP, when you hear the criminal justice system, that's something that we really don't talk about a lot. And just from me dabbling in it in the last year and a half or so, I see the big need. I see the big need, and I'm learning so much. So I'm so happy to talk about it and get the word out that this is speech therapy really needs to be here. Yeah.
yeah, and so how did you, and we'll talk about kind of the questions and addressing the learner objectives, but how did you move into this role of, was there like a particular patient that you had or just an opportunity that you saw? Because again, this isn't something that we hear a lot about in our field when it comes to the criminal justice system. How did you move into that world?
Well, it was a really kind of a cool story. I was attending a brain injury symposium at the Barrow Institute in Phoenix. This was like maybe 2 years ago or so by now. And I saw Dr. Kim Gorgons. She was a remote presenter, and she does a lot of work up here at the University of Denver. And she is a forensic psychologist, but her main concentration is traumatic brain injury in the criminal justice system. And so, I don't know if you've ever had this feeling when you're attending a presentation and the person up there, you're like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
this is amazing. All right. And then I'm like, oh, she's from Colorado. I'm from Colorado. And then I thought, well, and she told this really remarkable story about this individual named Markel Taylor. And he was incarcerated. He had something like a 300-year prison sentence. And he got his hands on her research, and because she was the one that found out that 76% of inmates have at least one brain injury that are in the jail or in the prison system. And so he got that research under his fingertips and said, wait a minute, this is me. I've had brain injuries in the past. This may be why I can't get my life the way I want it to be. So, with her research and his good behavior and his hard work, he earned his business degree in while he was incarcerated. He was
Wow.
able to get out of prison, and he started the Rebuild Your Mind initiative here in Colorado. And he is working to get brain injury services, concussion services for those who are incarcerated or at risk of being incarcerated. So when I heard this and she was saying all these like amazing things after the conference, I went home and I thought, maybe I'll email her. So I emailed her and I thought, well, she's never going to email me because she's an amazing, amazing
Famous
woman.
person.
And so yeah, she's a famous person. And I emailed her that Monday back, and literally 2 hours later, Renee, she had emailed me back saying, "Oh my gosh," because I just said I'll help in any way I can. She emailed me back, and by the end of that day, I was texting back and forth with Markel Taylor saying, I can do cognitive linguistic therapy. Let's hook up. Let's get this going so that I can do whatever I can to help. And it's just been we hit the ground running from there. So that's kind of where I got involved, and you just never know what the day is going to bring. And it's just been so fulfilling. And I'm like I said, I'm learning so much.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. That spark that kind of triggers you into your purpose and knowing that that's the thing that you're connecting with and that's the place that you should be. Because I've kind of had, not the same exact experience, but something similar happened to me in the past few months, and we'll have to talk about that behind the scenes
Yeah.
because we have a lot to talk about today. Um, but no, I totally get what you're saying because when you feel like you've got this connection, the thing clicks. It's like the light bulb goes off, right?
Yeah. And it is interesting because when you go back and when I'm sitting there and now I'm where I am, I think so many things led up to this because I did do speech therapy, in the juvenile detention center. I did do speech therapy in the mental health hospitals with individuals who have had TBI, and it just kind of like everything was woven, and now it just makes sense, and I'm so passionate about this population. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing, and I've talked about this before, and you may be able to kind of expand on this, but when I talk about trauma-informed care, like in actual like whole talks, presentations, one of the things that I find super interesting is that in like our state mental health hospital here, I know the SLP, and we've had conversations before, there's not training for trauma-informed care in the mental health hospital. It's like an initial thing for hire, but you might have somebody who's working in the food service or the environmental services or even the rehab part who, they're working there for 20, 30 years and they never have to go back and get any updated trauma-informed care training. They really don't. They do like this little introductory course when they get hired, and I just found that so fascinating slash crazy slash like, what?
Mhm.
Is that the same in Colorado?
I find it probably is. I do know I don't actually go into the prisons. I have done um like a Zoom type thing over the prison, so I don't know what initiatives they have, but
Mhm.
it is so nice. I think as an SLP, we are viewing this population with a whole new set of lenses that every single other person that comes in contact with them sees them in. And so we're seeing them as someone who has experienced trauma in the past, especially, if it's a traumatic brain injury, and no one is looking for that, and no one understands that. And so that's why I feel that speech therapy is it needs to be a part of individuals who are at high risk of being incarcerated, are incarcerated, or need to be are on the road out, and um getting back into the community after being incarcerated, because I have a lot of individuals who they've spent the better part of their life behind bars. So when you come from that area, especially with a documented traumatic brain injury, and then you try to go into the general public, it's so hard. And so what you see is a lot of individuals who do not have that training of like a brain injury specialist training that are helping them. It's like, well, you need to understand the TBI too, part of it, and how that affects their reentry into the general public again.
Yeah, so let's jump into just the components of a patient-focused brain injury assessment in this population. I mean, we can talk about the general population, but both really the general population and the criminal justice population, because you nailed it. It's people just make these assumptions, and everyday life that we encounter people who can functionally communicate, therefore they're normal, but they want to put this label of normal, right?
Yes.
And I use this example a lot at our local it's Harris Teeter, it's a chain grocery store,
Mhm.
but even before um my where I live now, when I was in college, our local grocery store chain there also employed people with different abilities, a lot of people with autism or Down syndrome, and um, they're in this supported work environment. It's really kind of a similar experience where if you look normal, no
Mhm.
one's gonna think anything is going to be different about your ability to process information, complete executive functioning tasks, be able to attend, be able to recall. So, what are the components of the assessments that you use, and what does that look like for this population?
Well, and there is a lot to say on first impressions. A lot of times I have individuals that come into my office or that I see that have just gotten into a fight.
Hmm.
And they're bruised. They look like they just got out of prison. I mean, it's a hard look. So if anyone else would see that, they would definitely put an opinion as to who they were seeing, what they are seeing, and make a complete decision on who they are. But like I said, we see them through the eyes of a speech therapist because we have such a cool lens to see someone in. And one of the first things that I do is, I tell people who I am. And especially for this population, this might be the first time that they're ever sitting face to face with a therapist. They have no idea what a speech therapist is. They have no idea, what cognitive linguistic therapy is. And so I tell them, and, I tell them that I'm a certified brain injury specialist, that I have 15 years, but then I also make sure to say one important phrase is that I may have all this experience, but I have no experience with you,
Hmm.
right? And if I get to know you, I get to know your brain. And for this population, Renee, it's almost like they let their guard down
Yeah.
because this might be, it may not be, but it might be the only healthy conversation that they have had in their whole life,
Hmm.
where someone just listens to them, wants to get to know them, and they're not met with like a bias or judgment right away. And a lot of the individuals I treat, they have done a lot of, they've broken the law, and they definitely, that doesn't make any excuse for their behavior, but it's so, you can just see how they relax. I said, this person is really gonna listen to me. And so when you do that, it opens up so many doors. And so I always ask them about, previous head injuries. But then I go into and I say, well, not only is there, I ask them about their executive functioning, their communication, their memory, but I'm also going through their body systems too. How's your vision? How's your hearing? And even in the digestive system, like how, because we know the gut is the second brain.
Right.
And a lot of times people don't put those two and two together, especially with this population. They've never even had the chance to say any of these things. And so another thing, when you are doing your assessment, you think, okay, I'm going to have a brain injury assessment, but sometimes they've fallen through the cracks because they're underserved. So I have people that I'm like, oh, you need vocal therapy. You need swallowing therapy. You need all of this. You need, articulation.
Dietitian.
Yes, you need all of that. And because you have not been able to get the services that you've needed. So on that initial visit, um, making sure that I really get to know them to see, like if they're having swallowing issues, we got to do that first, right?
Right. Yeah.
And making sure that they're okay. but that it does really keep you on your toes, but making sure that you really listen to them and you become a source of trust for them. It really helps them gain their best potential, really.
Yeah, so really the components are more about building rapport and also more of the informal assessment measures. And I think, for me, I agree 100%, and I teach that to my students. I did a TBI class last fall, and then I did aphasia. Well, it was really more of a language-based disorders because we did a component of dementia as well. But we talk a lot about informal assessment and how not only is it based in evidence, there's a lot of research that backs that up, but it gives us an opportunity to assess a patient without this test pressure that a lot of people get freaked out or anxious about. And then they're like, they don't do their best because they're like, oh my God, this is a test. And it's
Yes.
all in really the service delivery um, from the start of this shared decision making model, really. I mean, we're partners in this, and
Yes.
um, we actually already have a question, which is cool. And you
Okay.
kind of alluded to this a little bit, but Nancy asked is if the acquired brain injuries are due to fights or other trauma prior to incarceration. And I know, well, I'll let you run with that.
Yeah, so this is where a really good component of the functional assessment comes in, is asking about their head injury history. So a lot of individuals will have, and so I see a lot of teens, like around the
Hmm.
17, 18 years old, who are incarcerated or, serving their sentence, whether they're incarcerated or on house arrest. And so when you go into their history, you are seeing unhelmeted recreation when they were younger. You see partial drownings.
Yep.
You see domestic violence. Um, you see intimate partner violence. All of these and fights and definitely the fights, a lot of bullying at school. So you are seeing that, and you have to make sure you ask it in the correct way, right? So if you ask this population, hey, have you ever had a traumatic brain injury or concussion? They'd be like, no.
No.
But right. So you have to say, were you ever in a car accident? Did you ever fall off your bike? Did you wear a helmet when you were young? No, okay. So that is primarily where we're seeing the head injuries come. And then I will add that when these head injuries occur, especially when they're 3 to 10 years old, it's not just the head injury, but they don't receive care afterwards,
Yeah.
because of, certain situations, if it's a domestic violence situation, whoever doesn't want to take them to the hospital to get the care they need, um, or if there
Well,
is no funding to take them,
yeah.
and that's where they fall through the cracks. And then by the time they get into their teenage years, they're just labeled as bad kids, right?
Hmm.
They're just
Yeah.
bad. And then that's it. So no one is actually documenting this this head injury. So that's why, I think it's very important for school-based SLPs to make sure that question is always on their assessment. Has this individual, has this child had a brain injury? So it's documented. So down the line, because they might be okay at that time, but
Hmm.
down the line, things might start to fall out of place by the time they're 15, 16, 17 years old. But then we have something to go by. Oh no, this happened. So yes, we're seeing a lot of the times that I'm seeing these teens and adolescents, it's not from what just happened yesterday. If they got in a fight on the street, I got to look back. Oh, you partially drowned. You almost drowned when you were, 7 years old, right? So it's important to get that really good history, So you know what this child and what this adolescent has been through. I know a lot of my patients have experienced bullying, and even falls on the basketball court or
Mhm.
anything like that. And we have to remember, especially in some of the individuals I serve, especially if they're involved in like gun violence and they're being shot at, or so, they shoot at someone. It's like the ricochet of the gun and falling to the ground. So yeah, it you have to keep in mind and really ask those questions to say, how many have they had? And it's
Mhm.
probably a lot more than what they even can fathom, right?
Well, yeah, especially when you think about like childhood trauma, generational trauma, teen trauma, the bullying that you mentioned, because I know when I worked at the level one trauma hospital, you see people come in who their life looks so different than my life.
Mhm.
Even though I didn't grow up as someone who, as they would say, had a silver spoon in their mouth or whatever.
Right.
But I certainly didn't grow up in the streets, and I didn't grow up in a place where, um, there was no access to food or poor access to food, or you didn't know whose house you were staying at that night. And for a lot of these kids who grow into teens who are early 20s, like you mentioned, that's what their background looks like. And we get this stigma in society of, oh, like you said, they're bad,
Yes.
they're gonna be criminals forever. They like being in prison because it's a warm place and they get a free meal. And it's like there's
Yes.
so much more to it than that.
Yes.
And so we had another question from Haley. How did incarcerated people get access to SLPs? Oh, that is a great question.
This is the hardest part.
Yeah,
And this is so hard, because I'm just speaking about in the Denver area, and I'm in northern Colorado. Every prison and every jail is different.
yeah,
So if you get into one and you're like, oh yes, I get a point of contact in one, and I asked, oh, do you know anybody at this other jail? No, they have a completely different system. You have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. You have to be on some special call list and all of this stuff. It's so difficult. And this is where we need to pave the way for this. This is
yeah.
definitely a place where SLPs can help. Um,
Advocate, yeah.
yeah, advocate for these services. And I know, when I was at ASHA, I attended a session, for speech therapies and speech therapy in prison hospitals. And it's even hard for them to get services for their trachs,
Yeah.
and in the prison. So if they're having a hard time getting services for trachs and like dysphagia therapy, I mean, TBI, the invisible thing that people think is just a whole bunch of malarkey, in other disciplines,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a lost cause, if we're having a harder time even just getting them the proper trach care, this is hard. But that's where this really awesome program that Markel Taylor is trying to develop is to get in there, to get access to individuals who really really want to get to change and they want to be rehabilitated, to get them access to that care, so that they can begin their journey. And so it means that their incidence of recidivism, that's a hard word to say,
Yeah.
to go back to jail, so that we can reduce that. We need to have this prison reform. It should be easy for them to get that as part of their rehabilitation.
One for me, having worked with nurses that have come from the jail system or have come into like the step down unit and ICU units and then left and worked in the prison system for a while. And I've talked to them before about um, a, a lot of the mental health issues. A lot of that, again, it translates back to prior head injuries. It translates back to prior childhood trauma. But what they do is medicate,
Yes.
right? Same in the state mental hospitals. And it's not that I'm I'm not criticizing what they do. I think it's just, and you talked about this a little bit already, lack of knowledge, lack of knowing what we do as SLPs and how we can um, make a difference via telehealth or via, virtual visits, or for people who are on parole or in home arrest. This is a whole different kind of untapped population, even to me. um and I'm thinking about like patient focused functional treatment and what that looks like, because I know for our general populations, a lot of our focus is on executive functions and making sure that they can drop their kids off at school, or they can go to a parent teacher conference and feel confident, or they can go to a job interview and feel confident. But for someone who's been in the criminal justice system, how is that different? What does that patient focused treatment look like?
Yes, it is very different. So we want to make sure that and a lot of my patients have spent most of their life in the prison system, on and off. So you have to kind of think their brain in their formative years was being wired in the prison system. And now you want these individuals to come out of there and be okay in the general population, which is so different. So a lot of and a lot of the treatment that we're doing is making sure, they know how to use a computer. They know how to use a day planner. They know how to make sure they meet their appointments with their parole officer, right? Because if they don't remember to go to their parole officer, guess what? They go back to jail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And making sure they understand how the brain works. Because I can't tell you, like, the look in their eyes when I teach them about the brain. It's like, oh, wait, you're going to teach me about this? Like, you're gonna let me know about this? I'm like, yeah, because when you understand how your brain works, then you're more likely to understand the effects of drugs and alcohol, the effects of sleep, and how that is going to work into making you the best you can be. So a lot of my treatment, first and foremost, is making sure they understand what components of a healthy brain environment they need to make sure that they're doing, which is difficult. So I usually teach about sleep, nutrition,
Yep.
exercise, and brain rest, right? To make sure that they're, because I always say, sleep is not rest for your brain. Your brain is really, really busy when you're sleeping, storing all the memories. So we have to have a time to just rest. And this is difficult for this population because, number one, a lot of these individuals do not know where they're going to sleep that
Mm.
night, right? I have a lot of my patients who are sleeping in parks and under bridges. And I have a lot of patients. And then number two, the nutritional part.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't know where they're going to get their next meal. A lot of them are only eating one meal a day, or if that. Um, so it's educating them about, yes, when you sleep well and you eat well, your brain is going to get better, right? And you're going to feel better. That's when we can provide the best environment for your brain to rewire. I could give you all the tasks and all the things in the world, but if you're not going to change your environment, it's not going to do a bit of good, right? So educating them about how the brain works, and I really feel like it empowers them to then say, okay, what are the little things that we can do to help? Now, and that's hard to make that transition because
Mm-hmm.
one of the pros of being in a prison environment is that everything is very regulated, right? You get up at you get up at the same time, you go to bed at the same time, which is for us SLPs, it's like, yes, a great sleep schedule, like that's great. And they eat at certain times of the day. That's also what we want to see. And exercise, they're able to go into the yard at the prison or do, body weight things. So that's all good. But then when they make the transition to home, right, and they're around all these other influences and they have to do it on their own, that's where we see a huge point of education need so that they
Mm-hmm.
will be able to educate themselves. And that can make or break their treatment. So I always make sure I start with that and educate them about just the basics of how the brain works. And so they're like, "Oh, okay." And we that's one of my favorite parts of my job is making sure, seeing what they're coming from, what are the variables in their life, and they're very tough a lot, and making sure to tweak their environments, and just using what they have to create the best environment possible at that time. So if
Yeah,
that,
because it's all about holistic care when we're looking at brain, and I teach my students this a lot, and I talk about it a lot, but like it- people have this old view of the heart is the thing that keeps your body going. And we know that that's not the case. Your brain is like in charge of everybody. Your
right,
brain tells everybody else what to do, whether it's the parasympathetic nervous system or autonomic, all the things. We know that your brain is actually in charge of organ function, hormone
yeah,
regulation,
yes,
distribution of your nutrition, like you mentioned. And I think it's so complex because even like you mentioned about being incarcerated, you're eating at the same time, but you may not be eating things that are necessarily good nutrition. You're eating things that are provided to you, kind of like in our system where depending on what hospital you work at, it looks like dog food
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
or it's good stuff. I mean,
right,
really,
yeah,
once they stop letting, or when I worked at in inpatient rehab, we had our own. Initially, when I worked there 15 years ago, we had our own people that did the cafeteria food and the patient food, and it was like homemade stuff, and it was really
oh
good.
yeah,
We would go down there and
yeah,
eat because the food was
yeah,
good. And then
yeah,
they went to a more the managed practice,
mhm,
food service, and then I was like, oh, this is I don't want to eat this. So I'm sure my patients don't want to eat that, and that's the same sort of system in prisons. They have this managed food system, and it doesn't always take into account people's personal preferences,
exactly,
allergies. Um, it's a whole host of things that if you haven't worked in the environment, you haven't thought about it. You're
right,
just making a lot of assumptions based on, people like to watch these crime dramas and these prison shows, and they're like, oh yeah, I know. They just don't. They want to go back, and there's a lot of bias, like you mentioned really early on too, about what the general population thinks about why people just make this choice to continue to go back. And sometimes it's not really a conscious choice. It's a habit.
yeah,
You said it perfectly. It hasn't been presented in any other way. And no
yes,
one said, this is what happened to you. No one's rectified that with them as a patient. They've made it more like you're just a bad person.
right,
And I
right,
think that's a good way to jump into just ways that we can increase our outreach to work with underserved populations, especially for people that do have undiagnosed um, TBI or ABI, because that's a lot of what we see, even in the general population. So how does this reflect back to um, our patients that are incarcerated or have been incarcerated, and how we can increase our outreach? Because that's another thing that someone mentioned. When they're talking about school system, I know this is a big long paragraph of a question,
mhm,
but Nancy again said parents are often hesitant in this. I'm thinking she means in the school system
mhm,
to give a complete history, and SLPs are left to try and put pieces together. And she said her husband was employed CDC. I'm assuming you mean California Department of Corrections
mhm,
for 25 years and never had an inmate receive SLP services
mhm.
in California. So.
Yeah. And I think this is where we need to get more boots on the ground and realize that the speech therapy, we need to be in multiple places. So getting individuals having a TBI screen, whether it's in the school system whether it's at shelters, domestic violence shelters for those experiencing homelessness, just at general health fairs, anywhere that you can get to the general public. One of the things that they do over at, I know they do it down at the Barrow Institute down in Phoenix, is they have like a women's group for those who have survived, intimate partner violence. And they have a whole awesome brain injury support group for these individuals. And so it's getting into those places. And because we know that I think it's like 60, I want to say the percentages are so high for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, who are in a homeless shelter. Chances are they have had at least one TBI,
Yeah.
and chances are they have not received services for that TBI. So that's really important as to why we should all be informed and have more opportunities for these TBI screenings to be given at these different places.
Have you seen anything about working with the parole system or the kind of supervised release on screenings in that manner? Or do
We're
you know
we're
anything about that?
we're definitely working at ways to get screens accomplished for that, and also in like the first responders as well, for police and firefighters. We're trying to get more screens there. We're trying to get screens in the mental health facilities, so that people have access to that, because we're finding, if an individual has a severe traumatic brain injury, they are in the system, people know about it, and they're getting those support. But we're finding with the mild to moderate, they're falling through the cracks because they're just, and especially in this population with their symptoms, they're just labeled as crazy, but in quote to air quotes. So, and the people that are around them make them feel that way too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, and I mean, I just remember that I heard this from a patient like a couple weeks ago, just based on their symptoms. And we know that this population as well is very much, it's higher risk to become addicted to drugs and alcohol. And so I just heard 2 weeks ago, like because of this person's behavior, their friends and family were like, oh, you need to go smoke some weed, you need to go do that. And it's like, oh, no, that's what people are being told. And it's like, no, we need to treat this very methodically, right? We can't just be telling people this and thinking that that's going to make it go away, right? Um, so making sure they're getting this good informed care from someone like a certified brain injury specialist. I mean, and I say that, and with this population, it takes more than a speech therapist. We work as a team with psychotherapy, vestibular therapy, neuro-ophthalmology. We need this well-organized team in effect, because a lot of my patients have vision issues. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's so hard when you're an inmate and you have a vision issue and you're trying to get a job and you can't focus on the computer. And so there's many pieces of the puzzle, and we're all important. And and when we work together, it's such a beautiful thing, for this population.
Yeah, so do you wind up with referrals strictly through this one particular individual and agency? Or do you find that you're getting kind of access for individuals to have care through like their PCP once they leave, or is it more word of mouth? Like, how do you wind up working with some of the people that you work with?
Yes, well, I do get referrals for this from this one organization. It is starting to be word of mouth. And I am starting to work with physicians that people are like, oh, this is a certified brain injury specialist that will work with me. And a lot of times I'm hearing people that are being turned away because of they're just too complex. They have too many mental health issues, and it's hard. That's so hard, But again, when you're ready and willing to work with this population, I mean, it's just really amazing all the good things that can come and that they do start to turn around. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that takes us right back to the beginning where we're both like, bring me all the brain injury. This is
I know because
so
there's so
twisted.
I know, but there's so many people that are falling through the cracks that, that can wind up, with loss of job, without a home, without knowing where their next meal is going to come from. And
Mhm,
then that can turn into, dependency on drugs and alcohol, which
mhm,
can turn into unfortunately, maybe getting involved in the criminal justice system. So if we
mhm.
catch it early and we empower them to know how to take care of their brain in a healthy way, give them the strategies they need to functionally participate in their life, then it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we have an organization here in my city that it's actually it's a charity, but they're working with not necessarily just underserved youth, but just our community in general, um, working with youth who want to volunteer to learn how to do gardening, which sounds so like whatever. But what they're doing is they are working with schools to identify volunteer opportunities for these high schoolers who want to learn not only a skill, but a lot of them have a different ability or they've had a history of TBI or concussions, and they're teaching them how to um, plant things, care for it, and they're really it's therapy without it being, therapy from us, but it makes sense when you look at what they're doing because they're taking this person who may have otherwise had a whole different path,
Yes.
and they're teaching them a skill and they're seeing the fruits of their labor. They're growing this plant and they're harvesting these vegetables or these flowers, and they're learning about seasonality of food, but they're also learning about the nutritional value. And I think that when we think about functional treatment, and what a perfect
I
way
know.
to do that. I had a patient when I worked in assisted living who had dementia, that he had a background in gardening, and that was what he wanted to do at assisted living.
Yeah.
He wanted a raised bed garden and it kept him going. He had
I
lost
know.
his spouse, and it's really no different,
Yeah.
right? It's just when you change your bias and you change your mindset of what you think this person deserves, because a lot of times I hear that word deserves,
Yeah.
which is just so ugh, I hate
Yeah.
it. It's just
Yeah.
so
Yeah. And
serve everybody.
yeah, I always think as a speech therapist, we need to become sort of like a chameleon of who needs what, and how can we make therapy fun and functional depending on that person. And that goes back to that very first day when you say, I'm here to get to know you because you are a unique individual with something very special to offer to this world.
Hmm.
And when you get to know them and you find what that is, especially when you're talking to this population, you think I'm special? You think I'm unique? You think I have something worth to give? Yeah, I do. And let's figure out what it is, So, and when you do give them that opportunity and you get to know what makes them tick and what brings them happiness, that's where we're going to see the brain grow, right? I mean, we're not going to see the brain grow and rewire, you know, doing like worksheets and with that. I mean, especially in this population, you do not want that because they're gonna they're gonna they're gonna just walk out.
Well, not only that, they may have components of learning disabilities,
Exactly.
dyslexia,
Yeah.
alexia, some dysgraphia or whatever. They might have a lot of different components of that they've never been told they had that either. So yeah, if you give them a worksheet, they're gonna be like,
I don't
well,
care
what?
about that.
Yeah, no, I had an aphasia patient that I inherited from our pediatric SLP when I started the outpatient program, which that's all like that whole sentence sounds terrible. She was great, but he said this isn't for me when she tried to give him the CLQT CQ cognitive
Yeah.
linguistic quick test CLQT, and
Uh-huh.
he took it and balled it up and threw it in the trash and walked out on day one because he
Yeah.
was like, I'm not doing this.
No, if
Um,
you, especially in this population, if you come at it in that way, you will get no rapport. You will get no functional gains, and they won't come back the second time.
yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see if people made that, like parole officers or even the criminal justice system made it a condition of their um, in reentry into society,
Yes.
how that would work out, how that would play out.
Yes, I think that would be a fantastic idea that this is like a mandatory. I often think, because I've been with people, with the high risk population, but I've also been with individuals who are getting ready for their sentencing. And so a few months back, I had an individual who was getting ready to start their 7-year prison sentence. And this was someone who was 17 years old. And I feel like it's really important to gain rapport with someone. If I had the perfect world, right? I would gain rapport with that one person before they started their prison sentence, right? To say, this is your brain. You still have a great brain. This is what I want you to focus on while you're incarcerated, and maybe meet with them every month or every quarter. So how you doing? Were you making sure we document if they've had any other brain injuries, right?
Hmm.
From any kind of prison violence or anything. So someone will be documenting them, and with them on their journey. And then at the end of their term, making sure that we re-educate them. They know you. You have a familiar face. They understand, where you're coming from, and then give them the skills they need going up to their release, and then beautifully reintegrating them into the general public once again. Like that
A
would be
dream come true.
that would be so wonderful.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's like a thing. I don't know that this is real life. I'm like dreaming big, partnering with their like with criminal attorneys
Yes.
because a lot of them I'm sure are public defenders and they could give a rat's patootie because they're just so swamped and you would have to find the like one diamond in the rough who would even care
Yes.
that has the capacity to care because let's be honest, I mean they're overworked, they're underpaid, and it's not like they don't care, but I think they get to a point where it's like, okay, I got to find something else because much like healthcare workers, they're burnout too.
Exactly. And it is hard, I feel my heart just goes out to all of my patients who tell me what kind of language is used at them at their
Mm-hmm.
court, when they appear at court, and just the trauma of hearing people talk about them and say things to their faces. So this is a part where there does have to be more education to say, hey, this could be different. This person does have potential. We just have to see it in a different light and present it in a different way. Present this information in a different way that they can use this to build their own potential, which is great. I know with some of the people that I have served, I have talked to people that are in charge of sentencing and given my recommendations of what I've seen throughout their therapy journey, and it does help them reduce their sentencing or even getting out earlier, and because they know, okay, they are hearing it from me in my speech therapy lenses, how this person is functioning and what I can see, because I'm actually getting to know them very well in this higher level thinking category that not very many people are giving them the chance to show, right? So I feel like that's a really awesome way that we as SLPs can help that.
Yeah. Well, and so KK asked, what screening and assessment instruments do you use? And there's a couple other questions in there, but I'll go with that one first.
So right now I'm using the Favres, the
Mhm.
FAVRES.
Yeah.
I'm doing that. And then depending on sometimes they're not able to attend to that. Sometimes they're not able to complete that. So I do a lot of like informal memory things, passages, executive functioning, just problem solving, because sometimes that's just too much. It's just too much. And like I said, I don't want to lose them, right? I want to put things into where they can grasp. And I think that helps them increase their potential in our therapy sessions.
Yeah. And I think, I'm even thinking for me working with TBI and trauma spaces that I've been in, a lot of times where we start with a really low scale, like a low Rancho score, would be those informal things like identifying who people are in pictures, maybe in their room, or um, just telling about their family if that's not a trigger for them, or
Mm-hmm.
telling about who their friends are, their people that if they have a support system, who those people are, how they came to know them, um, talking about their education background because a lot of here, I'm in an area where we have urban and suburban, depending on where there's 5 hospitals within a 40-mile radius of me that I worked for all 5 of them at one point. And you get a wide variety of, we have a lot of ex-military or active duty military. We have a lot of farmers out at the rural hospital and laborers. We unfortunately had a lot of heroin and other drugs, polysubstance abuse. And so the backgrounds are so varied on their educational level that they may not be able to do a formal test where you're looking at formal reading, formal writing, um, being able to um, even do like retell of a passage. That's just not
Exactly.
something they can attend to. So it really there's so many layered components, I think, in our general TBI population and certainly in the population that's higher risk and maybe does have some substance abuse or polysubstance abuse background. The other question with that, along with that same thing is, please spell Dr. Gorgon's name and organization.
Okay, so she's at the University of Denver, and she's Kim Gorgens, Gorgens.
Okay. And then the name of Mr. Taylor's program.
Okay, so he's in charge of the Rebuild Your Mind project. And he was just Dr. Gorgens and Markel Taylor were just featured in People magazine this previous September 2024. They did a whole spread on his amazing journey, because it's just remarkable. So you can, if you could go back in the archives, you could see them. They're just doing such amazing things, and he's every time I see him, I'm just so full of inspiration, seeing what he's come from and what he wants to build for individuals. It's just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, we've got a few minutes left. Are you comfortable sharing? You did a really beautiful piece on your Instagram the other day about a client that you worked with who, first of all, kudos to you for making such a big difference because not everybody would be willing to jump in with this population. So,
Yeah.
do you want to share a little bit
I
about
would
what you did?
I would love to, because I'm so proud of this individual. He came to me, he actually received a brain, and he had many brain injuries during his childhood. He was bullied because I think that he had that condition, alopecia. So he lost a lot of hair when he was young. And so that he was the target of a lot of bullying. And then he got into he made some wrong choices and wound up in prison. He actually had a television thrown at his head while he was in
Mm,
prison, and he was in a coma, and he went to the hospitals for several days. He went back to prison, and then he was released on house arrest. And so I first came to know him on house arrest last year. And so when you're talking about an individual who is on house arrest, yes, they're in their own homes, but they are surrounded by so many variables and so many family things and so many triggers. And I'm so proud of him that he's worked through those, um, through getting a routine in place, making sure his diet was good. And it's hard to do that when you are in an apartment and you can't even exit your porch, right? And it's a lot of mental, it's just a lot of mental things and psychological things that happen. And during that time, he also, his wife gave birth to his firstborn baby girl. So it was like navigating that with him. That was our functional therapy, making sure, he understood how to take care of her and the routines. And he's like the most amazing dad, like amazing. And so this great behavior and the building of routine and understanding how his brain worked, and works, he was granted work release, which was awesome. He got back into doing the things he loves. He loves to sew and he loves to make awesome fashion. And I'm like, this is great. This is so amazing. This is how we wake up your brain and we make your brain happy. So and he just continued getting better. And then actually when his sentencing came, I mean, he might have gone to jail for a long time, but because of his good behavior and because he found a job, he was able to get there, on time, made a schedule, worked through this emotional regulation. We were talking a lot about that, making sure he was on point for his job and dealing with coworkers and bosses and, how do I feel and what do I say? And, because when you're in a incarcerated for so long and then you go into a workplace at a pizza joint, you're like, what? Like, what's this world I'm living in? So it's navigating that from a higher level reasoning point of view. So he was able, when his sentencing came on, he was granted release. He was taken off the ankle monitor. And then we were able to navigate him the ins and outs of finding his own home. So he was able to move out of his, where all of his family was, and just take him and his wife and his daughter, his new beautiful baby, and they're living. And he started his own LLC for his fashion brand, and he has his own podcast where he's explaining the effects of TBI and trauma and mental health issues. So this is possible, and this
Yeah.
is, we really have to make sure that we know that this is possible. It's not just something like this person was maybe going to go to jail for a very, very, very long time. But because of how he was educated and was able to apply it to his own life functionally, we were able to put this together. And he's he's living his life now, which is a whole nother thing, because he's having like imposter syndrome now, right? Like, this isn't me. I'm like, no, this is you. You did this. You are awesome. You are amazing. So it's just about having that constant person, that can see, like I said, that can see us and through a speech therapist's eyes, to see this potential in a functional way. So I'm just very proud of him. And also with other individuals that I've seen, in this group, I mean, all of them are making such amazing gains. And I always say a little goes a long way,
Mhm.
and you just crack a window, and you don't have to change everything overnight, just little by little, and it's going to make something just more beautiful in the end.
Yeah, no, again, I'm so grateful that you came to my course at ASHA and we met and connected, because I just really had no idea at that point what the work was that you were doing. We just kind of connected on a general TBI love.
Yeah, I
So
know.
kind of creepy
I
sounding,
know. I know.
but those of us who love TBI, we understand that. But Jessica, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for sharing it with us. I really appreciate you being willing to come on the podcast and jump out of your comfort zone and um, share all this positive and good energy that you're putting out into the world. So again, just really thank you for being here and being so willing to share.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun and such a great opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We do have one final question. Is this person's podcast available for the public to help others? Do they have the podcast name?
Yes, so I have it on my Instagram. I believe it's called Sold Goods. Sold Goods, SOUL apostrophe D. I can look it up and I can send it to you. Um, that is available.
And
Uh,
someone asked if Jessica has an Instagram. Yes, she
I
does.
do. Yeah, I do. I'm at the Loom Connection. I'm also on LinkedIn too. I don't post a lot, but I'm there. I have it here. Okay, he has an Instagram at damaged goods a association ASSOC. And then that's his sold goods. That's the name of his podcast, SOUL apostrophe D goods. That's the podcast. And then the damaged goods is his clothing line that he is hoping to get started.
Gotcha. And I'll put those both in the chat.
Great.
So again, I appreciate you so much. I look forward to working with you again in just a few weeks.
Yes, I am
Um,
too.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a really cool cognitive communication conference on Speech Therapy PD on Sunday, June the 8th. For those of you who want to join, we have a really great lineup of speakers as well. But I know we need to wrap up. Jordan's ready to kill me. So just if you've joined us for the live episode and your state license requires live CEUs, be sure you complete all course modules, including the one that says complete course before the end of the day on your Speech Therapy PD account. And again, Jess, great to see you and thank you so much. You're welcome to come back anytime and work with us.
Thank you. Nice to see you and thank you. All
Take care.
right, bye-bye.